Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. I'm Rob Eshman, the national editor of The Forward, and I'm here to tell you I'd like to live to be very old and very healthy and die in my sleep. And I'm not alone. I think over 2,000 people have signed up to join us today and submitted already pages of questions. So I think there's a lot of people who feel my way. Our speakers today, Dr. Nir Barizilai and Dr. Sofiya Milman, are at the cutting edge of unlocking the secrets of longevity. And I'm thrilled that you two will be joining us today to talk about how to die young at a very old age.
Pleasure.
Dr. Sofiya Milman, I'm going to introduce our speakers. We're going to have a conversation. I encourage you to send in your questions in the Q&A below, not in the chat. Dr. Sofiya Milman is Associate Professor of Medicine in the Division of Endocrinology and Geriatrics and Director of Human Longevity Studies at the Einstein Institute for Aging Research. She's a 2014 recipient of the Glenn Award for Research in Biological Mechanisms of Aging. Dr. Nir Barizilai is the founder of the Institute for Aging Research at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and the author of Age Later, Health Span, Lifespan, and the New Science of Longevity. He was born in Haifa in 1955. He became chief medic of the Israeli army before obtaining his MD in internal medicine from the Technion Israel Institute of Technology. I'm going to stop there and we're going to go right into Q&A because the first question I want to ask you, Nir, is how did you get into, you were in Israel, how did you get into this whole aging longevity idea?
Well, you know how they say that children have imagination, right? But I was walking when I was 13, it was my bar mitzvah year, and I was walking with my grandfather every Saturday. And he was telling me the story of his life. He was a pioneer coming from in 1918 from Russia to Israel, planting trees in Jerusalem, planting, drying swamps in Hedera. And I'm looking at this guy who looks old and chubby and bent and bald or white hair. And I just said, it's impossible that this is the same guy. In other words, when we look at our grandparents, we don't see ourselves. We think it's somebody else, but that's what it is. And this problem for me throughout all my career was, isn't that the biggest biological ever? I mean, you look at people, you don't know who has high cholesterol or blood pressure or diabetes, but you can know who's old and who's young. And you know that people who are old are going to get into lots of trouble. So this is kind of something that somehow wasn't obvious to me as a young person, and that's why I pursue this career.
And I think what's so interesting is from reading your book is this revelation that aging, as we understand it, as your grandfather experienced it, is not inevitable.
Well, yeah. Well, look, we'll die, okay? I don't see how we stop that. But aging the way it is now shouldn't happen anymore, really. It shouldn't happen. The fact that we, over age 60, started accumulating disease after disease, with treatment after treatment, with treatments that, with diseases that have their own pain, and treatment that have their own side effects and antagonistic with each other. This is not what we should do, in particularly now that we know that aging is flexible. Aging can be targeted, aging can be delayed, aging can be stopped and reversed in certain instances. So we don't need to go the way we are. We need to catch the wave that changes it, and we should do it now for us too.
So what you're saying, if I understand, Sofiya, is that aging is the biggest risk factor for all these different things, all these different diseases, and we should treat aging instead of treating these individual diseases. Is that what you're saying?
That's precisely it, right? You don't really see 30-year-olds getting Alzheimer's disease, cancer, diabetes, or cardiovascular disease, right? These are diseases that we associate with aging. And what is common to all of them? Age. So there's something about the organism as it gets older that it becomes permissible for these diseases to be manifested. And so we feel that if we can target that commonality between all of these diseases, the aging process itself, then we can delay all of these diseases simultaneously rather than treating one disease at a time.
So why did you decide to study centenarians as a way to get a handle on the problem?
So one thing you all realize that there is a discrepancy between our chronological age and biological age. Think of your friends, think of your parents. There are people who are slow and people who are fast in aging. And we realize that the people who are the slowest in aging are centenarians. And we decided that it makes sense for us to collect a certain population of them in order to find what we call longevity genes. What's in their genes slows their aging, and how we can translate it actually into treatment, to develop treatments so we can slow aging and prevent the accumulation of diseases.
And then talk a little bit about the study that you did or that you're doing, and why you picked specifically Ashkenazi Jews to focus on.
So we're trying to really identify the genetic factors that are contributing to longevity, right? Because most evidence suggests that the genetics are much more powerful than the environment in terms of determining one's lifespan and health span. So anytime one does a genetic study, there's strength in numbers. And ideally, researchers try to find a population that will be relatively similar in their background genetics, because then you can find potentially a rare gene that has been amplified multiple times, right? Anytime you have a population that arose from a small number of founders, like the Ashkenazi Jews or like the Amish, then if there was any genetic change that may be important, will be amplified so much more because you had few founders who then gave rise to many children. And so because the Ashkenazi Jews are such a population where they came from a small founding population, it is much easier for us to identify these rare genetic variants that may contribute to longevity that are much more amplified than had we studied a general population.
But it's not because Ashkenazi Jews have a greater proportion of centenarians, or do we, or do they?
To the best of knowledge, no, there is nothing special about Ashkenazi Jews that leads them to live longer. In fact, we've compared our studies of Ashkenazi Jews to studies done in other centenarian groups that were much more diverse across the United States and even across the world. And they all seem to follow a similar pattern where they live long, but they also live relatively healthy lives, delaying these diseases that we normally associate with aging by 20 to 30 years. So that's nothing unique to the Jews. This is a general feature of centenarians.
And this was a question that was actually submitted, and I thought it was interesting. What about Sephardic Jews? Why not look at them as a control population?
Well, we are trying to expand. So let me just make another point with the Ashkenazi also, that they're in the United States, they're also homogeneous in education, which means they're also homogeneous with their socioeconomical status. And this in the United States really is very decisive for lifespan of people. So this is also very important, not only their genes, and maybe because of the genes, but because of this achievement. Now, yeah, I would love to do Sephardic too, if we had enough Sephardic centenarians, but most of the Jews in the United States are not Sephardic, but we're expanding our study now to recruit any centenarian. We need a bigger number. We need to find more genes. So we're including now many centenarians. The technology is advanced. So I would love to do Sephardic, but that's true to all centenarians.
And then, so in this study, how do you separate out you have these wonderful examples of people who live well into their hundreds and they're healthy and they're happy and they're having these great lives. They're going to work every day. So I guess, how do you separate what of that is environment and what of that is genes? How do you get to that truth?
So maybe this is the time to show you the clip that we sent to you. This is a guy who was almost 105 when he was when the video was done. And please note, really, the major fact is if you're healthy at any age, then life is really good. So please notice that, and then we can answer. Sofiya will answer your question.
Okay, so Gabby, you're going to play a clip, and everybody this is about a 2.5 minute clip from the Institute. So let's all watch this.
In this office building on Madison Avenue, New York City, 104-year-old investment advisor Irving Khan is working hard, as he has since his career on Wall Street began in 1928. He shares his secret to a long and healthy life.
To wake up in the morning and have something to look forward to.
Irving's curiosity and keen business sense have led him to become a widely respected value investor, a member of the New York Stock Exchange, and chairman of Khan Brothers, the company he founded more than 30 years ago with 2 of his sons, including Thomas, who is the president. Irving works 5 days a week with his 67-year-old son and 29-year-old grandson, Andrew.
And how are you going to link the underwriting projects?
Playing an integral part in managing over $700 million in assets.
This is the Aztec website.
And Irving says not working is unthinkable.
Well, I would pay you if you took it away from me. I try to buy it back.
He believes mental challenge is key.
The important thing is to keep that brain going, you see.
50.2 million increased 20.8%.
To stay sharp, Irving reads materials online, 2 financial newspapers daily, and a wide range of nonfiction.
I read a lot of science. I read no fiction, no mystery stories, and no sex novels. So that leaves a lot of time for science.
And it was Irving's interest in science that led him to participate in the Longevity Genes Project at Albert Einstein College of Medicine, led by researcher Nir Barizilai. Nir and his team have recruited more than 500 healthy elderly, ages 95 to 112, and their children. Irving and Thomas are part of the study, as is Irving's big sister,
Muskets is 5 feet long.
108-year-old Helen Reichert, a former television host and fashion historian. So far, Nir and his team have found several gene variants that are more common in this group and protect against cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and Alzheimer's.
Erwin has the CTP genotype that seems to be protective against several age-related diseases, including cognitive decline.
Nir's team has also found that some genes seem to protect against the effects of certain lifestyle habits. Irving, for instance, used to smoke, but quit to set an example for his children. And Helen smoked for more than 80 years.
You can see both from him and his sister that those genes have real amazing effect, not only on the fact that they're alive, but considering the fact that they were smoking, and this should have shortened their lifespan immensely.
And Irving believes long life has its benefits when it comes to business.
Because part of it is some of the advantages that you have when you're older. And you know what's rotten and what's fresh and what's good and what's bad. And you can participate on a higher level.
I find that clip amazing. And in journalism, we'd say you buried the lead, because when you find his sister halfway through, you find out that he's got an older sister.
And I want to tell you, there are actually 4 siblings. I'll tell you the number 4 stories. One is there are 4 siblings. The younger sister died when she was 102, and they were shocked because the other died at 107, 109, and 110. When I met Helen first time, she was 100 years old. she opened the door in an in a Manhattan apartment, and she was smoking. And I said, Helen, nobody told you to stop smoking? And she said, the 4 doctors that told me to stop smoking, they all died. Okay. And now Sofiya will tell you about their interaction with the environment.
Yeah, so I think this is a nice segue into that. And what we're finding about these individuals is that they, as Nir said, interact really well with their environment. So despite having these risk factors like smoking or maybe an unhealthy diet or even being obese, they seem to do well. So their genes somehow protect them from the negative impact of their environment. And we've done a study as part of our group where we looked at the children of centenarians who inherit the genetic predisposition to healthy longevity from their parents. And we have found that if you looked at people who were smokers and were obese and had high cholesterol, they were still doing better than their counterparts without longevity. They had less cardiovascular disease. So it seems that somehow these people, even despite having a worse diet and not exercising maybe as much, are doing well. That's not to say that the rest of us, should not exercise and eat right. That's not what we're here to say. The environment is important. But what this really highlights is for those who have these longevity genes, the environment is much less of a risk factor. And for the rest of us, yeah, if you didn't have parents with longevity and you don't carry longevity genes, then it is absolutely important to take care of oneself.
So how do you define one of these super agers? Is it just by virtue of these genes, or what's the definition for you?
So we look at them, we look at age, right? So age is one of those determinants, but what's more important than age itself is being healthy at that age. So our criteria for recruitment is that, at age 85, they're still living independently. And so that's a marker.
95.
95, sorry if I said it incorrectly. So yeah, at the age of 95, they need to still be living independently. So that's a marker of intact cognitive function and overall general, health status.
And you're saying, so that the population of these super agers, of these centenarians, people who live in their hundreds, what percentage smoked, what percentage, exercised every day, what percentage were obese?
So when we compare them to a general population of those who did not achieve longevity, so we've actually compared our centenarian population to a national sample of individuals who were born during the same time as our centenarians. So these were really their contemporaries across the nation. And we looked at the rates of obesity, at the rates of smoking, and rates of exercise. They were essentially identical. So our centenarians were not any more likely, to lead a healthier lifestyle. And in spite of that, they have achieved longevity.
And I would say that more than 50% were obese or overweight or obese of our centenarians, that smoking was in 60% of the men and 30% of the women, that exercise, even moderate exercise, even house cleaning or biking, less than 50%, and vegetarian less than 3%. So they're by no way as a population, they got there because they did something that we all should do. It's in spite of it, in fact.
But did they get there? This was a question. Did they get there because there were also happened to be born at a time of modern medicine where, I'm assuming these people had high blood pressure, that they had, were they on statins? Did they also have the advantage of being born at a time where they had these ameliorating drugs as they got older?
Well, no, we our first cohort, we call them the virgin cohort because they're not bionic and not medicated, right? They didn't come with pacemakers or artificial limbs or special drugs. And in fact, I would argue that most people, right? Life expectancy in the United States now is less than 80. which tells you that those drugs are not taking you to 100 years old. It brought them to 100 years old.
But I also noticed, I did a little Googling after I saw that, and I saw that the son of Irving, of Mr. Katz, actually died in his early 70s, I think, or mid 70s. And I'm wondering if, so did he not inherit these genes, or are we living at a time when exposure to all these chemicals or exposure to, the things that they say are bad to us, plastics, everything else, cuts our lifespan short?
Right. So I also saw, I just looked when you showed the clip, I saw some of the question, and somebody says, hey, my mother and father died in their 50s, my sister in her 60s. And I want to make sure our discovery of longevity genes, that some are inherited and some not, right? I mean, think of it, you inherit half of the genes, or somebody inherit the gene and his brother does not inherit the gene. But I think this is the major point, finding those genes and looking at the mechanism. Okay, you can say, what do? You transplant genes? No, we actually can create medicine, and based on our study, there are already 2 medicines that passed a phase 3 trial that are really based on the results of our study. So medicine is really what can help you if you don't have those genes, to protect you and allow you to get older. That's really the purpose of our study. And not everybody is inheriting those genes even from their parents. It's just simple to think that, you can have a dominant trait or recessive trait. And if it's recessive trait, then it separates again in the next generation, and it can take away the longevity.
I want to get into what those medications are, because we have 1,000 questions suddenly about how do I get these medications or how do I get into the study. But what about attitude? I noticed my parents are both in their 90s. They have the best attitude of anybody I've met. They're very healthy. And I always credit that as being part of why they got into their 90s. Or is that too simplistic? What did you find about attitude, personality?
You want me, Sofiya, to answer that?
Go ahead, Nir.
Well, they have an incredible personality. Okay, they're as a group, they're very outgoing. They're optimistic, extrovert, and they have lots of components of a positive personality. And we published about it until I went and saw this guy. He was a 104-year-old guy, and he was like that. He was really very, very nice, very energetic, and he had no bad word to say about anyone. His daughter-in-law was great to him, and everybody was kind to him, and he was just an amazing guy. And I woke up, I woke out of this interview and bumped into his son. Remember, his son is 80 years old, right? And I say to the son, just what I told you, your father was just amazing. And he looks me in my eyes and he says, you should have seen the son of the beach when he was my age. He was terrible. He was a terrible guy. And then you realize that personality is not as stable as we think it is through, when you go from 80 to 100. Think of it. First of all, you get older no matter what, right? I mean, we're just slowing aging, but at 100, you're pretty old. But you're also, your spouse died, you moved from one house to another house, then you moved to another house. There are lots of changes in your life, and changes in the brain. So we cannot really assume that the personality is what got them there. In fact, I would highlight what Mr. Khan said, that he said, the thing that's important is to keep the brain working. And I would always argue, maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's your genes that allow you to keep the brain working, and not working the brain allowed you to get there. And maybe there are both of those, but certainly you need to have something inherited in order to get to this age.
Why don't you talk a little bit about the experience this population has with Alzheimer's? And also I'm wondering about just in general senility? I mean, do they have the same issues with, forgetfulness and everything else that we associate with getting older that we all experience?
I would say that, they do develop these things, but on average, 20 to 30 years later than the general population.
Wow.
So we're significantly delaying it. Now, that's not true for all of them. Some of them, go to their last day completely cognitively intact, sharp as a tack, reading daily newspapers, as we saw in this clip. So in general, they're protected, with some, never developing these diseases at all, and others delaying it by a good 20, 30 years.
And we have those anecdotes of two male centenarians who actually have the genotype for Alzheimer's. It's called the ApoE4 genotype, which the textbook will tell you you're getting demented when you're 70 and you're dead by 80. And they're 100 and not demented. So it shows you that the protection of those longevity genes really slows aging enough to prevent you from getting Alzheimer's even at age 100.
Now, talk a little bit about these longevity genes. What are they? What did you find? Like, what genes did you discover that are giving these people such amazing protection?
Well, there are many groups of, there's no one gene that is a longevity gene and everybody needs that to get there. There are actually several groups of genes. And I think the most important group for us, the one that we have the most, probably more than 50% of our centenarians have something that stunts their growth on the genetic level. And this is an important concept because in a certain way, what we need to do with aging is to stop the growth and get the energy to protect from breakdown, okay? So this is on the genetic level. Sofiya, maybe you should tell about what you found on the phenotypic level of those people.
Sure. So as Nir pointed out, one of the things that we have been identifying are levels of growth hormone. And typically, growth hormone does what we think, right? It promotes growth, and it's really important for people, or primarily for children, to grow. It contributes to linear growth, and levels are highest in puberty. And then the levels tend to decline as people age. So the natural, I think, response that most people would have, well, if it's good for you when you're young and then it goes down when you're old, well, we need to replace it, right? We need to give somebody growth hormone to make them youthful again. But what we have found is actually the opposite, that those people who had lower levels of growth hormone when they got older, they actually did better. They lived longer, they had less dementia, and it seems to protect them from other diseases that we associate with aging as well. So what we have kind of hypothesized and are now doing studies to further elucidate is the fact that, growth is important when you're young, but when you get older, you really don't want to sacrifice growth for repair. You really need to maintain the body and the function of the cells. And if you're going to substitute growth for repair, you're not going to do so well because you're only going to promote growth of things like cancer. And we know higher levels of growth hormone promote cancer growth and are associated with higher risk of cancer.
And you saw this in the animal models too, that mice that were, when you slow down, what was it again? Stunted growth lead to longer lives.
Right, right. And not only that animal models that are dwarf, they live longer, but when we give animal a certain antibody against the growth hormone, one of the major growth hormone, even at old age, when they're pretty much like 70 years old equivalent, they will still live much healthier and longer. So I think the point is the fact that part of this anti-aging fashion was giving growth hormone, we think it's probably really dangerous. And you should actually avoid that.
What about hormones? Just as long as you're on that subject, people taking testosterone, taking estrogen, taking these other hormones to kind of, reverse the side effects of aging.
So let's start with estrogen, because I think that's a hormone that has been well studied in older populations. So we had the benefit of the Women's Health Initiative, which was a very large multi-site national study that included thousands of postmenopausal women who were given estrogen to combat, the effects of menopause and aging. And what that study has found is that estrogen actually increased the risk of breast cancer and cardiovascular disease in these older women. And so estrogen is no longer recommended as an anti-aging treatment. And now we're actually doing a study of testosterone in our population. And what we're finding, curiously, is that men develop menopause too, just much later than women. They develop menopause about 30 years later compared to women, so in their late 80s. And we're seeing a very similar pattern that would be seen with female menopause. And for us, the question is, well, should we be treating these men with testosterone, or should we leave them alone because they're achieving, their centenarian status despite having this male menopause and having low testosterone levels? So there's something that needs to be appreciated about the fact that, a hormone may be good for you when you're young, but it may actually be detrimental when you're older. And this is really the new frontier. I think that it's really important for us to understand this physiology of aging and what constitutes normal and healthy aging, and not to mess it up, because it's easy to give something, but are we doing the right thing is the real question.
So you were talking about medications that, for those of us who weren't lucky enough to be born with these longevity genes, what kinds of medications are you developing that we can take, and also how quickly could I get my hands on them?
Well, there are two very strong medicines that are in human use now. And when you give them to rats or to mice or to nematodes, to worms or to yeast even, they will all live longer and healthier. Saying that, we are studying them in order to make them relevant to humans, but this is not done yet. So I'm not telling you that there's a proof to that. But one of the medication, and I see like 50 people are asking about metformin.
Yes.
So metformin is an anti-diabetic drug, but it's actually was used in the 1950s to prevent flu and malaria and other things. And it's during this period that it was noticed that it lowers glucose. So then it became anti-diabetic drug. It's generic, it's very cheap, but it was noticed during 70 years of use of this drug. It was noticed that people on metformin don't develop diabetes, don't develop cardiovascular disease, don't develop cancers, don't develop Alzheimer's, and there are a variety of studies to show that. And what we are trying to do is to do a study with that in the elderly to really demonstrate that it prevents aging, which means it doesn't prevent one disease or two diseases or three diseases, but a cluster of all those diseases. We're going to move them. We don't care what disease you have or what you're going to get. Whatever it is, we're going to move it. And this is
move it to later. Move it to later.
Right? Delay it. The reason we're doing this study, which is a great obstacle to us, is that the FDA doesn't recognize aging as a preventable thing, which is probably common to most of the listeners until now, right? You didn't know that aging can be prevented pretty much and maybe stopped. And so we have to do a study with the FDA where we repurpose this drug. And by no means it's the strongest drug. There'll be other drugs and combination of drugs and other approaches that are developing really rapidly now. And we can make a real impact in stopping aging as long as the FDA will have an indication of preventing of aging or the age-related diseases.
So with metformin, you haven't even gotten to the point where you've been able to have the study yet, or you already have done this? Where are you at?
No, the study was about to launch several times last time pre-COVID, and we're waiting for the right time to do it. I mean, we're lucky not to have started in the last year or two, because COVID would have devastated that. I should just make one comment about metformin. There are 9 studies around the world showing that people who were on metformin had less hospitalization for COVID and much less mortality. I'm talking about more than 50%, 67% less mortality in metformin. So even during the COVID, we're kind of feeling very bad that it wasn't something available. Imagine if we could prevent 50% of the death of the elderly, and people over the age 80 die 200-fold more than people over the at age 20. Okay, so this could have been helped.
I noticed after I read your book this weekend, I Googled metformin, and I noticed there's a lot of places online where they're selling it or they purport to sell it as a, as an age delay. Are these legitimate? Is this would you recommend people jump the gun and start taking it?
You see, because I'm doing this study, I'm not recommending to do that. Okay,
you take it?
I know that it's popular, and people saying, you can stop with this study that's called TAME, Targeting Aging with Metformin. You can stop it now because everybody's quoting you for taking metformin, and there are millions of people who are doing that. And I'm not suggesting to do it, but I'll tell you, the COVID was a challenge for me, and it was really painful. It was an ethical dilemma. And I did put my in-laws on metformin because I believe that it would be protecting, and they survived. Maybe they would have survived anyhow. I can tell you that my wife and I had COVID early on, and it was very mild. And we think it's because we're on metformin for being pre-diabetic, for another reason. But I'm in no way suggesting for the population to take a drug out on a Zoom event that has not proven the way we want it to be proven to do what it does. And I'll stand by that.
Okay, so metformin aside, are there other drugs that you've developed or other therapies that you developed because of the genes you've discovered in this study that you could talk about?
Well, the drugs that were developed, that both of them are actually drugs that meant to deal with cholesterol or increase the good cholesterol and decrease triglycerides, which is another form of lipids. They were developed not for longevity. They were developed for lipids, okay? And they passed a phase 3 trial, and the companies are discussing how to use them best. And they used our study because they said, wow, if there are more centenarians, the percentage of more centenarians than regular population who have this mutation that does what our drug is doing, boy, this is going to be safe. But they didn't think about the aging aspect. They just thought about the safety. So we are pushing them now to do to look at the elderly population and use that and show that it prevents maybe Alzheimer's or other things besides cardiovascular disease that it does.
Somebody asked a question whether they could be tested if they have the longevity gene. And I guess my second question for that is, how common do you think these longevity genes are in the population?
So 23andMe, that many of the people are doing, had a panel, and I haven't checked recently, but had in the panel our longevity genotype, and it has some other longevity genotype. So you can get some information about that. But the value of this genetic is as the value of other genes. Let's say if you have a gene for cholesterol, but your cholesterol is normal, so what's the point? It's the cholesterol level that are really important. The genetics is less predictive than some other phenotype. So I'm not sure what will be the value of longevity genes in the population. And there it depends for each gene, but in regular population, they're the ones that we looked first at those that are at above between 3 and 5% in the population. So they're really relatively rare because centenarians are rare. I mean, centenarians are 15%, okay? So something like that. And now we're finding longevity genes that are in less than 1% of the population. But if 20 of our centenarians have something compared to just one of our controls, it can be a very meaningful longevity gene also.
So, first of all, what's the timeline for some of these drugs? Like, how long will people have to wait? Is this something that people who are now in their 70s could see benefiting from, or is this far off into the future?
That's a great question. So I believe that in the next 5 years, a drug like metformin will become a major drug to delay aging. And there are two other drugs that are coming, I think, close by. There'll be this procedure of the FDA, but I think the FDA is listening to us, and the FDA would like to help us as long as we have positive results. Now, there are $1 billion investment in biotechs in the aging field. I have a biotech like that where we're doing something that is related to longevity. And the timeline for biotechs is more in the order of 10 years. I always used to answer the question by 10 years from now, and I still do that. And there is an horizon that has been really accelerated because more people understand that aging is something that is flexible.
So what are the two other drugs you meant? You said there were two other drugs. What are their names?
One is a CETP inhibitor, and the name is, I don't know, Sofiya, do you remember the name? It's by Merck, and the other is a ApoC3 inhibitor, and it's by Ionis. And I don't remember the name of the.
I mean, I think the CETP inhibitor hasn't actually been, approved by the FDA. It has been studied, but it hasn't gotten FDA approved.
Right. There's phase 3. They passed a phase 3 trial, but I don't know if they decided what the FDA will approve it for.
And we saw, with the COVID vaccine and with just in general with our healthcare systems, there's so many iniquities built into the system. And I'm wondering, are these drugs going to be something that, like they're the Teslas of drugs, that wealthy people will get to live longer, and if you're poor or something, how do we know these are going to be equally distributed and available?
Yeah, so look, this is a good question. It was always a good question for any drug and any medicine. And the answer here is, I think, better than average. First of all, this drug metformin is the cheapest drug in the US market, okay? You can get 700 pills for $40 or something like that. So if metformin will be the standard, it will be the easiest and the most cheapest way to do. And by the way, the longevity dividend of that, if that's what the United States population will do, it will translate to trillions of dollars, okay? It's really a huge effect. Even if it elongates health span by 2 to 3 years, it will have a huge effect in the economy for a very cheap drug. Now, other drugs that will come through, just like what happens when you have new drug for other diseases, will be more expensive for several years, right? And as long as the patent holds for the pharmaceutical, and then they'll become cheap. And that happens now also. And I wish the government will say, we should open the drug to everyone. We'll pay the pharmaceuticals and we'll make them available for everyone. I would certainly be willing to go to Congress and talk about that. But I do think that it won't start that way. And I think that maybe health span providers will have to approve those drugs, and some of them will and some of them will not. And we need a lot of them to do it because we need the pharmaceuticals to develop drugs and better drugs to make higher impacts.
So in the meantime, there's so many questions about this. People are taking vitamins to keep aging, to fend off aging. They're taking antioxidants. Do any of these things, have you seen any clinical reason, or in the studies you've done of the centenarians, are they taking these things? Do they have any effect?
So I can address the question of centenarians, and we really haven't seen, they're not taking any particular supplements, as Nir pointed out, they're not eating a particular diet. There are very few who are vegetarians. And again, they may be very unique because they do have these protective genes. And so for them, the environment is not an impediment, so to speak. And so we have not identified, any particular nutritional supplement that they take that is contributing to their longevity.
So I would add that, first of all, I think that vitamins, their major good role is they're good for the economy, right? There's lots of money spent on them. And thanks God, most of them are not harmful, okay? They're not harmful either because they don't have whatever the claim is, or they're vitamins and they're okay. But there are also vitamins that can be harmful. Vitamin E can be harmful in a certain way. So, so I don't have anything against vitamin, but we don't know that they're good. There's one nutraceutical that is really in the midst of aging. It's called, it's known as NMN. It's an NAD precursor. It's something that is really at the heart of cellular metabolism. And if you can replace this NAD by some nutraceutical supplement, it might affect aging positively, but it hasn't been really tested enough. And not only that, all those drugs that are NMN-like are not very stable. And you cannot know from nutraceutical when were they done and how stable they are. So I hope this also will become actually we'll know more about what it is and what it's doing from clinical studies and not from just being a nutraceutical, because we really don't know what it means.
And I think this really highlights the need for these very systematic investigations of these agents, because if we're really going to make a dent and we're going to convince the FDA that this is, the way of the future, we need to do these studies very rigorously and properly. And the perfect example was, estrogen, which was given to women, and they said, we don't need randomized studies because look, all the women who take it are doing great, but our randomized studies showed us otherwise. So this really highlights the importance of the work that Nir is doing, really trying to get the FDA on board and doing this the right way.
So would you say from the longevity study that things like exercise and good nutrition and healthy eating don't matter as much for longevity? It's not, is that the takeaway you want people to walk away with?
Absolutely not. Quite the opposite. So these things absolutely do make an impact on life and health span. And what we want people to walk away with is to understand that those things are important, but there's also an interaction between your environment and your genes. So if someone doesn't have genes that will allow them to overcome their bad environment, then it is absolutely imperative that they do all the right things and not smoke and exercise, and eat right. But for those few unique individuals who have the genes that protect them despite the environment, the genes that can overcome the detriment that the environment can cause, for them, it seems to be much less important. But because those are, rare individuals, or until we can patent those genes as a drug, as Nir says, we should still continue to do our daily exercises. And, Nir, I think, can tell you more from his personal experience, the importance of those things.
Exercise is probably the most important thing one can do it, any age, any sex, any exercise is the best thing. But I have to tell you this story. I was interviewed in an Israeli television the day I was leaving Israel. So I was stopping on a coffee place after my interview. And there's somebody there who said, weren't you just on television? I said, yes. He said, you changed my life. He's a young guy. I said, why did I change your life? He said, I was at the gym exercising when I saw what you're talking about, centenarians, and my grandmother is a centenarian. So I don't have to exercise anymore. No, that's not what I said. I said we all have to exercise, and maybe the grandmother, if she would exercise, she would live to 200 and not as long as she lived. So exercise is important. From the diet, let me just give you an anecdote, because in my lab, I used to do whatever drugs I was looking at. There was what we call a positive control. What's a positive control? Something that works. So for lifespan, what works is if you take animals and do caloric restriction, you give them less calories, they live much longer and healthier. And so people said, that means you should have less for breakfast, less for lunch, less for dinner. But that's not what we did. What we did is we brought the food, the whole food for the day, we brought to the animals in the morning. They were hungry, so they ate all the food. And now they're fasting for 23 hours or more. So it's really not. And when we start giving them food throughout the day, less food, but throughout the day, they didn't live longer. So actually fasting is important. And that's why one of the things that's very popular out there now, and most of geroscientists like me are doing, is intermittent fasting. We're trying to basically skip breakfast, not have anything between dinner, when we stop dinner, 8 o'clock until 12 the next day. And that's probably the form that's most relevant to the experiment we used to do with animals. And by the way, it's really easy to do.
So have there been any human studies that it shows any long-term benefits, your intermittent fasting?
So the answer is no. You see, and we are doing studies like that at Einstein now. But you see, that's a problem, because what you have to do with nutritions, you have to impose nutritions for enough time in enough people to get evidence. And that's hard and expensive, and we cannot really do it effectively. It's also something that when I said it's easy to do intermittent fasting, for me, it's easy then to go on a diet for 3 months where I can break any day. And here I have only 1 hour to go or 2 hours to go. I will not break. But that's me. There's lots of people who think they cannot skip breakfast. In fact, we're trying to see if maybe 12 hours is enough. But it's hard to do a study like that. It's in a long term.
And how long have you been doing this for?
I would say for a little bit over 2 years.
So I was wondering if these...
By the way, I'm 100 years old. Did I tell you that?
You look great. If all of these centenarians had done, had exercise, hadn't smoked, had done intermittent fasting, would their lifespan be that much longer, or is there some kind of cap to human lifespan?
Oh, cap to human lifespan. Well, we argue about the exact cap, but we kind of agree that it's about 115 years. 115 years. Although is our life expectancy as a species. Although there are people, there's somebody who lived to be 122, maybe more than one people, but it's about 115 years. And what we're saying is that since we're dying before the age of 80 now, there are 35 years that are relatively low-hanging fruit that we can make rapid advance in, okay? And by no means it means that this is the end, okay? That we cannot break that. So let me just give you something to think about the future. You can take a sperm of a 70-year-old man and fertilize an egg of a 50-year-old woman, okay? And we can measure by certain technique the age of the sperm and the egg. And the fertilized egg starts to divide and the new baby is formed. Guess what? The DNA of the baby doesn't remember anymore the age of the parents. We all start again at zero. In other words, we found a way in this example to do that. And this is kind of where a lot of research is now, to erase this aging. And maybe we'll have to erase it once a month or once a year, or maybe to take some treatment not to allow this aging to occur, at least in a certain day, and have an opportunity for healthy and long lifespan, more than even these 115 years.
And I think that goes back to what you were saying when we started the conversation about the difference between health span and lifespan, that you looked at your grandfather and he looked like a very old 65 or 68, whatever he was. And so it's not about living to 115 necessarily, even though the Bible says it has all our patriarchs and matriarchs, that it's about living as healthy as you can for as long as you can. Is that what your research points to, how to get the longest possible health span?
Right, and that's really our goal, is how to allow people to get the most out of their years, so they maintain their independence, they maintain their ability to do the things that they enjoy doing, and they have as much time with their families that is quality time.
Nir, I heard you talk to Bill Nye, the science guy, and he asked you how long you wanted to live for. And I was surprised that I think you said you wanted to live to 85 and die in your sleep. Is that what you told him?
Right. I think it was a more complicated answer. By the way, I didn't grow up in this country, as you mentioned, and my kids, who couldn't care less about what I'm doing, I became a hero when I was with Mr. Nye, the science teacher. And I even didn't think he was a scientist. It was a surprise for me. But I raised, basically what my message is, I'm repeating kind of what Sofiya asked. If I have several operations, so let me give you two options. I'll make you immortal. You'll never die, okay? The only thing is there's no reproduction, okay? We have exchange between reproduction, even in our study, between reproduction and longevity. So there's no new kid, no new smile, no first birthday, no weddings, no children, okay? But you live forever. By the way, if Earth is going to survive for 12 billion years, I'll tell you, I'm a little bit tired now already. I don't know that I'm ready for 12 billion years. How many Trumps there'll be, right? Or something. So that's one option. The second option, that I'm going to tell you, you're going to live till age 85 and without any disease. You just won't wake up at age 85, what you would do. And the point is that I would vote for a health span. I would vote for the health span because I think that's what makes life miserable, this accumulation of diseases and their treatment. So I'll stand by that. You can argue, you can get me, to say maybe 90 years old, maybe 90, but the concept is still.
Well, I want to give people a marching orders as we sign off here. We're waiting for these amazing drugs to come out. Most of us weren't born with these genes. What's the one thing each of you would suggest our viewers do to help them and get a better health span right now? What's the one thing you would suggest for them to do that they can do?
Okay, I'll go first, Nir.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
You know how hard it is for me to keep quiet. So.
So I would say the best evidence we have at this point, for what can keep you healthy, is being physically active. So exercising, making sure you're getting enough sleep, and following, healthy diet and not smoking. Right now, that is the best we have to offer, is, controlling our environment until, the next stage comes when we can have actual treatments.
Yeah, I actually, I said it before, I'm not going to change it. I totally agree with Sofiya.
Exercise, mental activity, important. Somebody just asked. Sleep.
Yeah.
All those things. While we wait for your studies and your cures and your drugs. I really want to thank you both. This has just been a fascinating conversation. I had a fascinating weekend reading your book, Nir, and I recommend everybody find that book. It's called Age Later. It's fantastic. I want to thank Gabby Brooks at the Forward and the whole team at the Forward for helping to put this together. Especially want to thank everybody for joining us. And I want to thank you, Dr. Milman and Dr. Barizilai, for all that you do and for joining us today. Thank you.
Can I just say that, can I add a sentence?
Absolutely.
Well, first of all, thank you. And thank you for who introduced us, Sofiya? Robbie Kaplan, who is in our study and introduced us. So we want to thank her too. But I want to say something else. It's not about the elderly only. It's about people who are surviving of cancer. The treatment of cancer ages you. Radiation and chemotherapy ages you. And we need to protect those people. People with HIV have diseases 10 years before other people. They aging also quite rapidly. If we want to go to Mars, we're not going to get to Mars before we have those treatments, because by the time we get to Mars, we'll have cancer or other diseases. There are plenty of other reasons why we need to do this. And it's not only about the aging, it's about our society. I would argue that poor people who cannot exercise and they don't have good diet, they could be protected also by drugs like metformin. So it's not only about the elderly, it's about our society and its goals too.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was having also moral qualms about, reading some of this, that, this constant, what you said is perfect, because, do we focus on society's issues on getting people to live another 10 years or on helping 10-year-olds cure, overcome diseases? And what you're saying is this helps at every stage in life, what you're learning. And I think that's a really important point. So thank you. Anyway, thank you all. Robbie Kaplan, yes, thank you for initiating this. And we'll hope to see you soon. And we hope to hear from you soon about these amazing new treatments. Thank you.
Pleasure.
It was fun.
Thanks. Bye.